Before we begin, as often in this series, I want to offer just a moment to pause, because this episode, it's not about overt violence or overt manipulation, but it's more so about the quiet way that we betray ourselves, I think, by mistaking fear for wisdom. So if you're in a tender place right now, or if hearing hard truths about avoidance, silence, and self-protection might overwhelm you, feel free to press pause. You're not weak for protecting your energy. But if you're ready to sit with this and to examine how fear dresses up in wisdom's clothing, I promise you this. What we could find here could change the way that you feel about silence and even your strength. Sometimes the most dangerous fear isn't the kind that screams. It's the kind that sounds like restraint, like caution, or like maturity. Maybe now's not the time, you might say. Or I'll let them figure it out on their own. Or I'm just staying in my peace. Right? These are some phrases that feel like wisdom that we might utter. They feel elevated and thoughtful and composed. But I think too often they're a mask. A mask fear wears when it tries to convince you that not acting is the noble step. See, I don't think we talk about this enough, especially among good men, especially among people who see themselves as grounded, as measured, as emotionally intelligent. But movements like 764, they don't just thrive in places where anger is loud. They actually thrive in places where fear has in some way been spiritualized, where silence is praised as strength, and where stepping back is mistaken for discernment, where calling something out is viewed as messy or as unwise or not my place. And the result is that harm goes unchallenged. And people suffer while others meditate on whether it was wise to intervene or not. And boys fall deeper into this online radicalization while their friends stay respectfully distant. And we call it wisdom, but it's fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of being rejected, fear of being dragged into something complicated, fear of losing control. See, this kind of fear is subtle. It doesn't panic, it just postures itself. It wears soft language and soothing tones, and it invokes peace and patience and timing, and it talks in circles until urgency is gone and harm is done and no one can be blamed. But here's the truth. Wisdom without courage isn't wisdom. It's fear with a good vocabulary. In this episode, we're going to break that down. We're going to look at how fear disguises itself as discernment, how self-protection is praised as poise, and how cowardice is often called maturity, especially by people who are too polished to admit what they really are running from. Because there's a moment, and maybe you felt it, a moment where you know you should speak, where you know that what's happening is wrong, where you know that you've seen enough. And then that inner voice kicks in and says, stay out of it. Or don't make it all about you, right? Or let people learn on their own lessons. So you shrink and you watch and you stay wise and quiet. But wisdom is not always quiet. Sometimes wisdom shouts. Sometimes it interrupts. Sometimes it says, this ends here. See, real wisdom doesn't avoid discomfort. It doesn't confuse safety with strategy. It doesn't let harm slide by unchallenged in the name of spiritual detachment. And if you're someone who stayed silent in the name of peace, this episode isn't an attack. It's more considered like an invitation to ask yourself, am I being wise or am I just afraid? See, fear begins early. For many boys, it's the moment they start to feel deeply, and then they're met with this subtle discouragement. It's not anger, it's not always ridicule, but measured, calm redirection. Don't overreact. Just be the bigger person, or keep the peace. The message isn't always loud, but it is consistent. And over time, it becomes internalized. Don't disturb the room. Don't say too much. Don't feel too much. By the time that boy becomes a man, he's been praised for being rational, for staying quiet when things get messy, for giving people space even when that space is more like a vacuum for harm. And when confronted with pain, especially pain that he didn't cause, he doesn't lean in, he leans back. He tells himself he's being respectful. He tells himself he's trusting others to figure it out, right? He tells himself that jumping in wouldn't be helpful. But underneath all of this is fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being resented. Fear of being seen. Fear that if he steps in and doesn't do it perfectly, well, he'll just be rejected. So instead, he protects himself with language of wisdom. This isn't just a personal issue. I think this is a cultural issue. We've built entire systems that reward appearance, especially the appearance of wisdom, like this calm, quiet, measured zone, right? Even when that wisdom is just disengagement. And we idolize the composed men who don't get involved. We call them mature and grounded and non-reactive. But what if these are just scared men? What if their detachment isn't depth, but more so distance? What if their silence isn't wisdom, but more so like a sense of withdrawal? When we label this behavior as noble, we're starting to set a dangerous precedent that true wisdom is synonymous with non-involvement. That strong men don't confront, they just observe. That good men stay quiet and then they just trust the process even when the process is actively harming someone. And here's where this becomes weaponized. Movements like the 764, they really count on this kind of wisdom that's coated with fear. They know that most people will feel uneasy about what's being said. But they also know that those same people won't speak up. Because speaking up would mean breaking character. It would mean disturbing the emotional equilibrium, if you will, of their circle. It would mean risking being seen as too much. So silence reigns. And harm gets rebranded as a different perspective. And those who do speak up get framed as reactive or immature or even aggressive. This is what makes fear in disguise so powerful. It gives bystanders this moral permission to basically do nothing, to stay comfortable, to stay and feel ethical while remaining inactive. And over time, this form of passivity spreads. It's copied, praised, it's taught, it becomes a way of being, a default mode of disengagement that looks like integrity, but is actually avoidance in disguise. But real wisdom doesn't keep you from acting. It informs you how to act. It slows you down, but it doesn't really shut you down. Real wisdom encourages discernment, not detachment. And discernment without courage is not wisdom. It's just a stalling tactic. It's fear with a clipboard. So what would it look like to stop mistaking fear for maturity? To stop using peace as an excuse for disengagement? Or to recognize the difference between being calm and being complicit? The shift is not about becoming reckless. It's about becoming honest. Because the world does not need more quiet men who have learned to look wise while in essence doing nothing. The world needs men who are brave enough to ask, am I actually grounded? Or am I just hiding in stillness because movement feels too risky? See, when fear disguises itself as wisdom, the damage isn't just personal, the damage becomes cultural. A community that's shaped by this kind of fear becomes emotionally passive. It praises quiet men, but it doesn't know really how to trust them. It tolerates harm, but it doesn't call it by name. It avoids conflict, even when people are being crushed. And over time, that community begins to rot from within. And friendships stay shallow. Pain becomes invisible. The people who like with the most to lose, like the most vulnerable, begin to carry the burden of isolation, while the wise hold back and call it boundaries. And here's the real heartbreak. The people who look the most composed are often the ones whose fear has calcified the deepest. They've stopped feeling, they've stopped responding, they've in essence replaced honesty with neutrality, and then called out wisdom. And this shows up in families, it shows up in schools, it shows up in the boardrooms, it shows up in relationships where one person is being diminished or controlled, and then the other person sees it or senses it, but then stays respectfully quiet. Because what if they misread it? What if they what if they make things worse? Or what if they lose the relationship? And so they wait. They stay mature. They watch the damage unfold from a safe distance. But safety doesn't always serve. Sometimes safety shields us from the responsibility that our integrity is meant to really carry. And I think that's how manipulation wins. That's how movements like 764 thrive. It's not because everyone agrees, but it's more so because enough people stay neutral. Enough people step back instead of step up. Enough people spiritualize their silence or rationalize their fear or over intellectualize the pain of others so that they don't have to feel it themselves. And the impact of this is generational, because boys grow up in these environments where truth is swallowed and where emotional clarity is considered dangerous, and where strength is measured by how calm you can remain in the face of dysfunction. And then they carry that forward. They become the men who watch their friends spiraling into despair and then say nothing. Men who know a relationship is toxic and say, but it's none of my business, right? Men who sense injustice in the systems around them, but default to staying in their lane. And the world around them keeps getting darker, because wisdom without confrontation is not integrity. It's complicity. At Uber Vintagers, my mission is to help men reclaim a version of strength that doesn't rely on silence to stay safe. A strength that knows when to be still, but also when to speak. A strength that is A strength that is rooted in not in detachment, but in discernment and in connection. Because wisdom is not about staying comfortable. Wisdom is about staying aligned. And if staying silent requires you to betray your values, it's not wisdom. It's fear with better branding. So here's the hard truth, my dear listener. The world does not just suffer from overt harm. It suffers from all the good people who stayed back, all the good people who stayed quiet, all the good people who waited for a better moment while the damage deepened. You may have thought you were being mature. You may have thought that you were being wise. But maturity without movement is stagnation. And if your wisdom keeps leading you away from honesty or away from intimacy and aligned action, maybe it's time to call it what it really is: fear. Real wisdom is not afraid of discomfort. In fact, real wisdom, I would say, is forged through discomfort. It's tested in those moments when silence would be easier, but truth is more aligned. And it doesn't avoid the hard conversations. It actually prepares those conversations. It doesn't detach to stay safe. It connects to stay real. So how do we reclaim that kind of wisdom? How do we distinguish it from fear? How do we stop from spiritualizing avoidance and start practicing integrity? I think it begins with self-honesty. So ask yourself, with compassion and not with shame, what's the real reason that I'm being quiet right now? What am I trying to protect by staying silent? Am I calling this peace because I'm afraid really of conflict? Or am I calling this maturity because I don't want to be misunderstood? Now listen, listener, these are not accusations. These are doorways. They're the starting point for men who are ready to grow beyond the mask of wisdom and into the reality of courage. Because courage doesn't always look loud. Sometimes courage is gentle and says, I need to speak up. Sometimes it's asking a friend, are you okay? What you said or did didn't sit right with me. Sometimes it's saying, I've been quiet for far too long and I don't want to be complicit anymore. See, at Uber Vintages, I believe that integrity is not about image. It's about alignment. And intimacy is not about passivity. It's about presence. Real wisdom shows up. Real wisdom risks awkwardness for the sake of honesty. Real wisdom does not wait for the perfect timing. It responds to meaningful moments. And it's willing to look messy on the outside if it means that one can stay whole on the inside. So if you've been hiding behind language that makes fear sound noble, this is your moment. This is your moment to come out, to get honest, to choose discomfort on purpose, because that's where growth lives. The world does not need more wise-looking men. It needs more men who are willing to be seen, more men who are willing to speak truth, more men who are willing to say, that was not okay. More men who are willing to act even if their voice sounds shaky. More men who are willing to interpret harm even if it costs them something. This is the wisdom that transforms a culture. Not the kind that keeps the peace by everyone being kept silent, but the kind that tells the truth in love and then watches the room rise to meet it in that same space. Let me know, my dear listener, how this episode today landed with you. I'll see you in the next episode.